Welcome to Let's Rewatch It Again. I'm Jordan, and why are you helping me after what I did? Because it's what Jesus would freaking do. Oh my goodness. Today we are watching Grey's Anatomy, a Christmas episode, and this episode is literally titled Grandma Got Ran Over by a Reindeer. I know, that's an actual song, and every single Grey's Anatomy episode is titled after a song. That one is probably one of the weirdest ones ever, especially if you know the song and you know how annoying it is. And also, it's an animated Christmas movie no one needs to see. Grey's Anatomy focuses on the lives of surgical interns, residents, and attendings as they develop into seasoned doctors while balancing personal and professional relationships. The title is actually an allusion to a classic human anatomy textbook first published in 1858. Shonda Rhimes developed the pilot and continued to write for the series until 2015 when Krista Vernoff took over, and she did previously work with Rhimes, and now she's the showrunner. And I have to say, you can just tell that it's not Shonda Rhimes anymore. I don't know. I just feel like you can. The series follows the life of Meredith Grey, Ellen Pompeo, the daughter of the famous general surgeon Ellis Grey, starting from her acceptance into the surgical residency program at a fictional Seattle Grace hospital. During her time as an intern, Grey works alongside fellow physicians Cristina Yang, played by Sandra Oh, Izzie Stevens, played by Katherine Heigl, Alex Karev, played by Justin Chambers, and George O'Malley, played by T.R. Knight. I love a good Christmas episode, and I don't know what it is about this one. It's probably all of the Christmas lights and decorations that Izzie puts up, but I just really love it. And season 2 is one of my absolute favorite seasons. So much goes on. So let me kind of jump you into things so that you have a sense of where we are. Grey's Anatomy is 19 seasons long, and I have to say, I stopped around season 12. I personally think it could have ended at season 10 or 11, but when you're making them big money, keep it going, I guess. In season 2, Meredith and Derek are not together because he's married. She didn't know, okay? Derek and his wife, Addison, who came in from New York City, are trying to make things work, but he still clearly has feelings for Meredith. Izzie and Alex are together for like half a second, and then he cheats on her with Nurse Olivia, who also dated George. I know, it's weird. And Dr. Bailey is pregnant with a little boy. George is still in love with Meredith, but pretending not to be, of course. Cristina is dating her attending, Dr. Burke, a talented heart surgeon, and they're kind of sort of living together, but she still has her own place. Now, right before this episode, Alex has failed his medical boards, and if he doesn't pass the second time, he will no longer be a surgeon. And the last episode, Meredith and Izzie got a dog together, which is a whole other layer of chaos. Our episode synopsis for today is Christmas hits Seattle with Izzie caring for a man who fell from his roof while hanging decorations. Meanwhile, Cristina performs a heart transplant on a depressed boy, and George has to contend with the family from heck. All right, it says HE double hockey sticks. It's just, I don't curse. I don't mind when other people do it. I just think it sounds silly when I do. We're going to go ahead and jump into the episode proper. I'm going to do my best today to kind of change things up a little bit. Instead of giving you a straight up play by play, I am literally just going to talk about the episode as it plays. First off, we have our recap, which I already gave to you, so that's kind of awesome. And we really see that Izzie is being tested as a doctor and as a person. Addison allowed her to take care of a very tiny, tiny premature baby. And Addison knew the baby would not make it through the night, but still had Izzie take care of her. And when the baby didn't live, that's really hard as a doctor to be like, I did everything I could and it wasn't enough. And sometimes that happens. The episode officially opens with a voiceover by Meredith, which is a huge, huge signature of this show itself. Meredith has one of the best voiceovers, I think, probably of all time. And I adore voiceovers. So honestly, from the very first few seconds of the pilot with Ellen Pompeo speaking over Seattle, I was hooked instantly. We get this really cool shot outside of Meredith's house to see a big, huge window displaying a very full Christmas tree. Izzie has decked this Christmas tree out with every single light and ornament possible. I can't even imagine how long it took her to do this because I know that she's a perfectionist. So to have every single piece all together, There's even stockings on the mantle and garland and a wreath. And Meredith is not happy, but she's trying to be supportive. Meanwhile, George is in a robe, which is pretty funny. It's evening here, and Izzie is looking very cheery in a Christmas red sweater. And I think it's interesting that George does not seem to be happy about Christmas decorations. I don't know. Maybe that just is me questioning things. He grew up in a family where his parents are still together and they seem like really happy, over the top type of people. I'm surprised that he's not a Christmas guy. I'm not saying that everyone who has a happy family has to be a holiday person, but I am a little taken aback that George doesn't seem gung ho to like hang Christmas lights with Izzie or even to like have an ugly Christmas sweater. That just seems like a really George thing to me. We then go to Burke's apartment, the fancy, cold, almost kind of sterile looking apartment that is super, super clean, and beautiful Cristina with her wild, wild curls. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm obsessed with Cristina's curls. I have curls of my own, but they will never be as amazing as hers. Cristina sees a tiny Christmas tree on the coffee table with some boxes of ornaments around it. And Burke is like, oh, well, I thought we could decorate it together. And she's like, I'm Jewish. And he's confused by this. And then she says, well, my stepfather, Saul Rosenstein. And he's like, oh, right. Now, I have to say, I know that there are certain like parameters that come with a Jewish line, bloodline, and whatnot. However, if she grew up in the tradition of Hanukkah, why not celebrate that? I love it. I think it's really cool that she embraced that life with her stepfather, especially because she had to continue to grow up without her father, as we find out later in the series. Cristina, as usual, is rushing out the door with a coffee to go while Burke looks so relaxed at the kitchen counter. It's so funny because I think of him as being at the hospital first thing in the morning, but he rarely seems in a rush. He is always calm, cool, collected. We instantly cut to a scene zoomed in on the scrubs of Dr. Bailey holding her pregnant belly, zoom out, and then flip around so that we are looking at all of our interns, who are nicknamed Magic, an acronym of the first letter of each of their names. I am obsessed with hallway scenes in Grey's Anatomy. The 5 of them walking in a tiny clump like a herd of antelopes is just so fantastic. We also get some really cool camera shots here because we switch to farther down the hallway from the side as they all walk by. And it's such a genius move to show how tightly all of them are walking, even though they're kind of fighting. Like Izzie is not cool with Alex right now. And Alex is at the back, Izzie's at the front, and she's suggesting that they buy a gift for Dr. Bailey and the baby, or maybe Secret Santa. And just as Cristina is about to just totally ruin her day, George and Meredith squish their shoulders together, cutting Cristina off, and are like, of course, whatever you want to do. They turn to Cristina and tell her, we're trying to be supportive. And Cristina is just like, God, they're doing their best to be good friends to Izzie and Alex. And I have to say, that sounds like a really difficult thing. You're trying to not take sides while also staying on both sides. Very difficult. Our transition is the opening of 2 hospital doors as Magic and Bailey burst through it. And there's Derek. He looks so tired in this episode. And I feel like we're really seeing the stress of his marriage and his pull toward Meredith. And it makes me tired for him. Like it just makes my heart break, even though I don't agree with how he went about things. We still love Derek. It's a problem. We go into a patient's room whose children are everywhere. He's fallen off his roof and he was trying to put up Christmas decorations. And basically his family celebrates absolutely everything that could happen in December and January. His children are singing and playing with toys. His wife is there, and Derek uses his finger to try to do a simple test. And one of the little kids is just jumping everywhere. And Bailey is like, do you guys need some quiet? Maybe take the kids out of the room. And the husband says, no, I don't want to miss out on time with my kids during the holidays. This time is just so special. And Izzie is over the moon excited about this man's energy for his family and for the holidays. So she gets to be the intern that's chosen for this case, which is pretty fantastic. I mean, why not? The guy who loves Christmas gets to have the intern who loves Christmas. We get a rainy transition shot of a glass door, and we're on the opposite side. So we get a mirror reflection of Seattle Grace Hospital and see that people are walking by with umbrellas because it's not snowing yet. It's still rainy, very cold and rainy, I'm sure. We then go into another patient's room that is less than ecstatic. There is a poor woman who's been waiting on a surgery for a gastric ulcer, and she's been scheduled for 3 days, but things keep getting bumped for emergencies. Her entire family is in the room, and they are not happy. The entire family is all talking at once. There's a grandpa who is laying in the opposite hospital bed as if he's a patient there, trying to watch the news. There's a teenage son playing a handheld video game with the sound all the way up. The grandmother / the woman's mother is griping at Dr. Weber, who is trying to explain that the surgery is non-emergent, which is why it keeps getting bumped for emergency cases, but they're trying to do the best they can. He's very sorry for the inconvenience. The husband jumps in and says, "Are you trying to say that my wife is not important?" Dr. Bailey even looks overwhelmed in this moment, which I have to say is pretty big. To get her flustered, that's huge. Everyone starts to yell over each other, and Dr. Weber says, "All right, your surgery can be scheduled this afternoon." Dr. Bailey is still handing out cases for our interns. That's pretty much what happens every morning, is that you get assigned different cases by your resident. So, of course, Dr. Bailey's in charge. She decides who gets put on what case. Dr. Burke arrives saying that he got a call from Eunice that he has a heart transplant, which is fantastic. So, of course, everybody wants to be on the case. Heart transplants are a very big deal. And unfortunately, Alex gets the pit and Yang gets the case. I mean, come on. She is obsessed with heart surgery, so it makes sense that she would get it. Meredith and Alex walk off, and he tells her that he has to take his boards tomorrow. He is not ready, and he's going to spend the entire day doing stitches in the pit. Burke and Cristina are walking down the hallway, and she's taking notes as they're talking about Eunice. And then he's asking her about when is Hanukkah? And she's like, "I don't know." She's not a holiday person. This is not her focus. Like, she is not an outside world person. She is organs, cutting, surgeries, like focusing in on the actual body and the work of science and medical world. Now, poor Burke is trying to say that he wants to be aware of her traditions. And she's like, "Burke, seriously, I haven't observed religious holidays since I was old enough to know better." And he's very taken aback by this comment because he's a religious person. And I think he's now realizing that even though they're dating and they align quite a bit on their medical practices and what they believe in the medical world, they may not agree on absolutely everything. Burke and Cristina allow this wonderful woman to know that her son has a heart coming to him from Eunice. This woman turns to her son and says, "Santa Claus is bringing you a new heart for Christmas." And this little boy turns to Burke and says, "Tell the bleep bleep, I don't want it." Cristina is secretly thrilled by this comment, and she's smiling in the background. Her and this little boy are going to get along. Our title fades in white and then blurs away. And we go back to discussing with our boy, Justin, that he needs this heart. The one he has completely worn out, and he has to have a heart transplant. When he was a baby, he had a transplant, and they only last so long. And the boy says that he doesn't care and he doesn't want it, but he won't explain why. And I just think this is such an interesting case, because when you think about it, he looks about to be like 9 or 10 years old. He understands the gravity of the situation. At about 7 years old, you start to understand that there is something that happens after life, that life is not forever. And this little boy seems to understand that. And yet he knows that if he doesn't get a new heart, that's it. We go to the OR board where Dr. Weber is looking over everything. Anxiety attacks, aneurysms, ulcers, must be December. All right, now we get our charge nurse coming up to say that Adele has called and she knows you're not in surgery. Now, Adele is Chief Weber's wife. And let me just say that Chief Weber is married to this hospital. He has a wife, but he's clearly married to his work. And that's a problem. Not everyone can handle 2 wives. Now, the message is that Adele said to tell him, "We are going to our niece's school pageant this morning. You have known about it for months." And after what you pulled on Thanksgiving, and then she started using a great many words that I don't feel comfortable repeating. Dr. Weber is like, "All right, now I have a surgery." And the charge nurse says, "She said something about divorce." Dr. Weber leaves after giving Bailey the ulcer surgery. I really love how we end this scene by Bailey gazing over the OR board, looking a little bit overwhelmed, but at the same time, the way that she holds her body, placing her both hands on top of her head, she's in her OR, so it's a little more involved. It's not just plain scrub top and pants, but it's a whole gown, the scrub cap, everything. We just see Bailey at her best. Overwhelmed or not, Bailey belongs in the OR. No question. An ambulance shows up at the pit, which is also known as the emergency room. I just think it's funny that they call it the pit. And a male has shown up 3 weeks post-op and reported extreme pain and something about a fruitcake because he tore open his abdomen. Oy, not good. Meredith says that she'll fight him for it, and Alex walks away saying, "No, it's for you. It's my parting gift." Okay, now here's the thing. We all know that Alex is a complete jerk, but he's the jerk that for some reason you want him to be better. You're like, I know you can be better than this, Alex. I know you can. And I have to say, it took me a lot of seasons to really warm up to Alex. But there's just something about him, like the way that he talks, the vocabulary that he uses is so distinctly unique that for some reason you do begin to warm up to him eventually. But it's a slow simmer to a boil, my friends. Addison and Derek are discussing what to give their families for Christmas. And I don't know, it just seems so surface level of like, man, we have all these issues and we still have to decide what to give each other's families for Christmas. Like, ugh. Derek gets pulled away by Izzie with the CT scans from their guy who fell off the roof, and Addison is looking nonplussed. Like, supposedly they're working on things, going to counseling, trying to pretend to be normal, and it's just not normal. It's just not. We all know this, and pretending is getting harder. We go back to the ulcer patient's room, and man, this family, they're just so loud and so negative. And poor George is just trying to take her blood pressure, and they are just all on top of him about like, why is it taking so long? Poor woman says that she's had 3 ulcers in the past few years. And honestly, we get it. She is stressed. Her family is a lot. The husband is berating George about how he hopes that George actually read the chart, unlike other doctors. And George is looking very much like, okay, I just really want to leave. Of course I read the chart. I'm a good doctor. We get a quick shot of Alex in the basement on one of the gurneys, trying to study for his boards. It doesn't look like it's going well. Meredith reports her gastric perforation to Dr. Bailey just as Dr. Bailey and George are scrubbing in for the ulcer patient. And oh no. So Dr. Bailey tells George, please take her back to her room. And George is like, are you kidding me right now? And she's like, yes, I am. This is an emergency. As George is leaving the room, Meredith takes this chance to let Dr. Bailey know that, hey, Alex failed his boards and I know that he needs help. Can you please take me off the case so that I can help him study? And I just love that about Meredith. I mean, you know what? No matter how you feel about our main character, and you know, it's okay to have mixed feelings about main characters because they're a lot. There's a lot that goes on with main characters. They're flawed. They're not going to be perfect. And that's why they're the main character. Dr. Bailey cares about these interns as if they were her own children. Their age is not that far apart, and yet she still cares for them the way a mother bear does. And so immediately she allows Meredith to help Alex study and puts George on the gastric perforation case. Now, unfortunately, Justin, our little boy who is getting a heart transplant, is also about to enter surgery, and he is trying to tell the anesthesiologist that he doesn't want the heart. Cristina steps in and says, until you're 18, your mother calls the shots. And Justin calls his mother a liar because she claims that the heart came from Santa Claus, and someone like that shouldn't get to call the shots. Christina's like, the heart you have is not going to get you very far. Bert comes in with his musical note scrub cap and asks Justin if he's ready, and Justin says, if I don't make it through the surgery, will you give the heart to someone else? The anesthesiologist places the mask over Justin's face, and we slowly fade out to our Christmas patient's room. One of the kids is telling the story of Hanukkah and how the oil burned for 9 days. Derek is trying to explain to the patient what's going on, and the kids are still in the room. And these kids are so young. The oldest is probably 8 tops. I mean, and I'm just guessing. The wife sits up and says, is it bad? And apparently the fall caused a subdural hematoma, which basically means that this man's brain is bleeding. Derek explains that there are risks to the surgery and it has to happen before the bleeding gets worse. The bleeding is actually in an area of the brain that controls speech. And so they're trying to discuss this without scaring their kids. And then the wife says, you know what? We have a doctor named Shepherd. Isn't that amazing? And the dad says, yeah, don't you think that's like a sign from God that our doctor's name is Shepherd? Oh my gosh, that just like makes my heart squish. We go into the surgery with Justin, our heart transplant, and Burke is saying that the heart is a perfect fit. Now all we have to do is figure out why Justin's so angry. And Cristina says, if I had that mother, I'd be angry too. And then she admits, actually, I do have that mother. We meet her mother later. Yeah, she does. Burke claims that Justin's mother is not the problem here and that she loves him and she never leaves. And then Cristina speaks up and says, she also never listens. She doesn't know him. Ooh. And Burke says, I just hope he changes his mind before it's too late. And Cristina asks, what do you mean by too late? And Burke begins to say, with all medical realities being equal, why does one patient live and another dies? And he believes that there's a connection between the mind, body, and spirit. And if Justin really doesn't want this heart, his body will reject it. And Christina's like, okay, let me get this straight. You don't just celebrate Christmas, you actually believe in Santa Claus. And we get this whole moment where like the music gets all like bing, 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 and everybody's looking at each other. And Dr. Burke is like, go and update the patient, like, get out of my OR. And she says, we're not done here. And he says, you are. All of the nurses and other attendants are looking at each other like, oh my God. Our transition shot is so cool. We're back in the basement, one of those giant circular curved mirrors, seeing a reflection of Alex pacing the basement floor as Meredith tries to pretend that she is a patient to give him a scenario that could be on his boards. And Meredith is saying that she doesn't know where it hurts. Alex is being a brat, and she's like, you're going to be judged by your bedside manner. There are times when Alex has the worst bedside manner, and I have to say that Alex actually does really well with kids and the underdog type of person, or someone who is a victim of like abuse, or just like someone who isn't listened to very well. He really steps up for them. And Meredith is like, listen, I gave up a huge surgery for this. So like I said, here's the scenario. It hurts here, here, and here. And this morning, I noticed my poop was a funny grayish color. Love that she's adding the accent. I mean, why not? Not everyone talks the same. Now, I don't know what kind of scenario she's describing because I am definitely not a doctor. We go into our gastric perforation case with Dr. Bailey and George, and he's asking, is that all you can save of his stomach? And Dr. Bailey says, yep, if eating is what this man lives for, we should put him out of his misery. And George jokes, paging Dr. Kevian, Alex Karev. And Bailey is like, I'm sorry, what was that? And George is like, oh, it's a joke. Kevorkian, Karev, Alex Karev, Kevian. And Bailey says, oh, I get the joke. I don't think it's funny. And one of the things I love about the OR scenes is we are having most of the face covered up by a mask and a scrub cap. So we always get these really intense eye contact shots. Oh, it's so powerful. We also get a slight muffled sound of the mouth that almost sounds like they have cotton inside their own mouths as they're speaking. And it's just the most incredible thing. It's such a powerful way to create a different side of a character by having their voice be a little bit different. The fact that they can't use anything on their lower half of their face. It's all about eye contact and arm movements, or even just a shoulder movement as well. Bailey picks up her scalpel and we get a side low view on the gurney so that we see part of the man's face and we are looking up at an angle at George and Dr. Bailey from the side. She holds up her scalpel and says, I make one mistake with this scalpel and this man is dead. My husband, he makes mistakes at his job all the time. And as far as I know, he's never killed anyone. But I have, and you will, and Alex did. He made a math mistake and a man died for it. You run that past your accountant. See how he'd feel if every mistake he made, someone ended up dead. And Dr. Bailey explains that he doesn't have to like Alex. You don't have to care about him, but you have to be on his side. We then go into Derek's surgery and we hear the sound of a drill. Now, again, I'm going to talk about the OR room and how interesting it is how we actually create characters out of sound effects in the OR room. We have a drill. We've got a suction with the little like straw sucking sound. And then we also have the heart monitor that makes sounds as well. But I just love the sounds that we get in the OR room to create almost a character of the OR room itself that feels very foreboding. And it really creates that sense of life or death in this room. And Derek is really surprised that Izzie cares about holidays. Izzie is explaining that she loves the family, Chrismica, and how cute are those kids. And Derek is like, really, Dr. Stevens? Chrismica? And Izzie is confused. She's like, I think it's sweet. And Derek asks her, do you happen to know what time of year neurosurgeons are the busiest, Dr. Stevens? And he says, there's no hard or fast rule, but brain injuries tend to pile up around the holidays. Folks fall off their roof, or they go skating for the first time in a decade, or break their heads open. And every year, people drive through blizzards to get to parties where they kiss germ-infected strangers under poisonous mistletoe, and then they get so drunk that they smash their heads through their windshield on the way home. Like I said, there's no hard or fast rule. And the way that Derek is speaking and the back and forth of the camera from Izzie's face to Derek's, it's just so dark and so quiet in this room. Oh my goodness. Izzie is quite taken aback by this attitude as well. We go back to the basement where Alex is trying to figure out where it hurts. So he's pressing on Meredith's abdomen. And Cristina walks in and says, okay, seriously, if you're that lonely, I could give you a catalog of some excellent. I'm not going to repeat it. And Alex is upset because he thinks that Meredith told Cristina about his failed boards. And Meredith is like, I kept your secret. It didn't do you any good. All right. And Cristina is like, oh, you can't be serious. And Meredith says, what if it were you? And Cristina says, it wouldn't be. And Meredith, well, what if it were? It wouldn't be. Meredith gets up as her pager is going off and says, be a patient. Do it for me. And Cristina says, fine, but when Tiny Tim goes all Norman Bates on us, I'm blaming you. Then Meredith, as she's leaving, asks, what was the diagnosis? And Alex says, gallstones. And she's like, yes, excellent. He's doing well. He's going to make it. Cristina climbs up onto the gurney and says to him, I'm a 55-year-old man. I'm nauseous and I can't stop throwing up. And Alex is like, you know what? Forget it. And she says, okay, evil spawn, you can nurse your pride like you were being a nurse, or you can pass your test and be a doctor. Up to you. And oh my gosh, the dynamic between Cristina and Alex is so unique because they do not BS anything. There's usually no emotion between the two of them. They cut to the chase. They cut right to the thick of it. And it's fantastic. That's what I really love about MAGIC, the acronym for each of their first names, is that when two of them are paired off, it's always different. If it's Cristina and Izzie, if it's Alex and George, Meredith and Izzie, Meredith and Cristina, every single pair is a different dynamic. And then when you add another one, it changes the dynamic again. The 5 of these characters were so well put together, and that's what creates the literal magic of this show. And when you take that away, I'm sorry, but the show ends. I'm going to say it straight up. And this is a huge spoiler, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds to skip ahead. When Cristina leaves the show, that's when the show ends. Because in my opinion, this is not a show about the romance of Meredith and Derek. It is about the friendship of Cristina and Meredith. And when that's no longer an option to be on the screen, we don't need the show anymore. Okay, spoiler over. Alex continues to go on like she is a patient and asks her questions, and she says, oh, right, yeah, I'm drunk, hiccup, hiccup. Meredith returns to Dr. Bailey, where she is trying to hurriedly eat a sandwich between surgeries. Apparently, a man tried to gift wrap a 70-inch TV for his wife and now has a strangulated hernia. Pretty ugly. That image sounds horrific. Bailey asks, in code, Grey, is that other project covered? And she says yes, and she allows Meredith to go scrub in. And poor O'Malley gets to go tell Nadia Shelton, our ulcer patient, that she's being bumped again until tomorrow. Of course, the family is beside themselves, yelling, and the grandpa can't hear anything, so they keep repeating it even louder. And now they're kind of yelling at George. And this poor woman, Mrs. Sheldon, is in so much pain. And George tries to intervene and say, like, your mother needs to rest. And the dad starts yelling at George, like, don't talk to my son like that. And George is like, I'm so sorry, but I really think that your wife should rest. And then the grandmother starts saying, you people have ruined everything. I hope you're happy. And then she starts sobbing. Okay, but I'm sorry. These are crocodile tears. I can't with this woman. And poor Mrs. Sheldon is like clearly in pain. She's kind of like moving around in her hospital bed. There's no relief from that, especially because her surgeries keep getting bumped. It's possible that they may not be able to give her certain pain medications because she's going to have surgery, and that can affect something. George backs out of the room, and we go to another scene of Cristina helping Alex with his boards. And Alex is trying to perform a breast exam on Cristina, and she's like, okay, that is a grope. This is what you need to do. Flat hand. So she grabs his hand and flattens out his fingers. And that's what I'm saying about Cristina and Alex. She tells it to him like it is. Now, as this is happening, George walks in and freaks out. And he's like, does Izzie know about this? Does Burke know about this? Cristina says, unbunch your panties, George. We're helping Alex study. And then goes back to Alex, do it, like the breast exam. And George says, I can't hear you when his hand is on your boob. And we're going to take a quick pause to talk about costuming right here with this show. Now, everybody is wearing the same blue scrubs. All the surgeons, all of the surgery interns wear blue, this light pale blue color. But each of the scrubs fits everybody differently. With George, it looks a little boxier and a little baggier around his midsection, making him look a little bit shorter, a little on the rounder side. Whereas with Alex, it's a little more form-fitting, making him look taller and a little lankier in build. And then, of course, the girls are usually wearing a long sleeve t-shirt underneath their scrubs in different varying colors. Sometimes there's a v-neck where you can't see the collar, or you can. And it's just a really interesting way of creating a character outfit without everybody looking exactly the same, even though we're all wearing blue scrubs. Cristina explains to George that poor Alex failed his boards. And George is kind of delighted by this. And he's like, that's pretty embarrassing. Cristina gets a page and says, he's all yours, Georgie. Do your worst. And George says, you're not giving me a rectal. Do not ask me to cough. Our transition sound is actually a overhead page asking for Dr. Cohen. Again, with the hospital sounds, this show is perfection. Well, to a point, of course. Cristina comes up to Burke and says, you paged me, and looks in to see that Justin has not awakened from surgery yet. And Burke asks if she got a psych consult, and Cristina says that she tried, but they told her to come back in January. Burke is very upset by this. He stuffs a pen into the pocket of his dark blue scrubs, and he's kind of hunched over this tall counter. He clearly is having a bigger issue with what's going on with Cristina, more than just the transplant or how the little boy feels. Everything is piling up for him today. Burke says that she disrespected him and mocked him in his OR, and that can't happen. And she says, it won't happen again. And he says, you equated my spirituality with the belief in Santa Claus. And Cristina says, Burke, science is the one thing. It's the one thing we have in common. I'm an intern. You're not. I'm a slob. You're not. I say I want to keep our relationship private, and you go and tell the chief of surgery, and you ask me to move in with you, and now you're religious. And he says, spiritual. There's a difference. And she says, not to her. And she says, I don't know what we're doing, and shakes her head. Oh my gosh. And he says, well, right now we're working. Page me if he spikes a fever. And then he gently slides the binder chart over to her, and it's such a quiet, subtle move of, this is in your hands now. Oh, genius, Burke, genius. We then cut to Izzie giving an update to the Chrismica family, saying that he's a little groggy, but he's slowly coming out of it, and they can all come see him now. All the kids run in, and they're so excited to see their dad. And the dad starts yelling that he has a headache. And the little girl's like, I'm going to sing for you. And she starts singing, and he starts getting angry to shut up about that insipid song, Jingle Bells. And he starts yelling for them to get out. And like, he has actual anger in his voice. And the little boy goes, you stupid shepherd, you broke my dad's brain. And Derek is looking down at the little boy and then at his patient like, what? We cut to an outside shot of our hospital just to remind us we are in the hospital right now. We've got surgeries, all these things happening, most likely a commercial cut, of course. And we're at about the halfway point of the episode. So that makes sense because we're at a halfway point in the hour on TV. So if you were skipping around trying to find something to watch, you know you're watching Grey's Anatomy. We're at Seattle Grace, and there's a surgery happening. Izzie and Derek are walking down the hall, and she's trying to figure out how his personality changed because they didn't go anywhere near his frontal lobe. Derek says that the CT might have missed something, or the personality change can be the wearing off of the anesthesia. And it could also be pain. And Izzie's like, he was in pain before surgery. And Derek says, if he doesn't improve, get a new CT. And Izzie stops him before he walks away and says, listen, you had his brain open. He was laying there unconscious and vulnerable. And Derek's like, are you serious? Do you think I poisoned him with my thoughts? And she's like, listen, there's a lot we don't know about the brain. How do you know that your words didn't speak to him on some unconscious level? You see her kind of look off as she says the last sentence. I mean, he trusted you to be his shepherd. And Derek goes, Dr. Stevens, you should be a little embarrassed. And she says, I am. They both turn away from each other and walk off. And I have to say, I agree with Izzie. When you are literally in surgery with someone, we don't understand what's going on with the brain or the psychological brain, the unconscious mind. We don't know. There are so many unanswered questions. We may never know. And so I have to agree with Izzie to some extent. They could have influenced him in a negative way by having that negative energy, that negative emotion and spirit in the room while his brain was literally open, or just him laying there able to hear them. Justin's mother is setting up a Christmas tree in his room, which is apparently not allowed, as Cristina comes in and says there are no trees allowed in the CCU. And the mother says, I know, but it's never been enforced. Cristina looks upset, but the mother asks, how's he doing? And Cristina says, surgery went smoothly, but it's too soon to tell. She starts to take his vitals, and the mother says, he's a really good boy, you just met him at a difficult time. He's been down. I don't know why. Like maybe because his heart is broken. And then the mother claims that Father Michael will be able to knock some sense into him, and she's still putting up more decorations. And Cristina is watching her do this as she checks the boy's heart with her stethoscope and says, no offense, but your son doesn't seem to be a fan of the holidays. He doesn't seem to believe in Santa. And the mother just kind of shakes her head and says it's a mother's job to protect her child's innocence. And this Christmas could be his last time. The little boy, Justin, wakes up and says, that's what you said last year and the year before that. And the mother is so excited that her boy is awake, as she should be. And she says, my big, strong boy, Santa brought you back to me. Cristina turns around, unplugs the Christmas tree, and grabs it and slides it out of the room because it was on like one of these tray tables that rolls. And she's like, I'm sorry, this is not allowed in the CCU. I love it. It's a way that Cristina is actually advocating for her patient in a very unconventional manner. I mean, like, honestly, maybe the tree isn't hurting anyone, but it is bothering the actual patient in the room. So it needs to go. We go into Dr. Bailey's surgery with the guy who has a strangulated hernia. And Meredith is asking, are we using mesh? And Bailey says, yes, the conjoined tendon is. And then she pauses and kind of steps back a little bit and puts down her tools and turns away. And Meredith is like, Dr. Bailey, are you all right? And Bailey says, yeah, I just don't want to throw up in the body cavity. Oh my God. A scrub nurse offers to wipe her brow and she shakes her head. And Meredith is like, Dr. Bailey, are you sure you're all right? Do you need? And Dr. Bailey holds up her hand and says, I need a minute, Grey. She shakes her head and says that when you operate, the rest of the world goes away. Hunger, thirst, pain. You don't feel it in the OR. But it's not that way when you're sharing your body with another person. Bailey has the most incredible wisdom and tone in her voice, and I'm obsessed. Anything she says, I'm all about it. Bailey finally turns around and says, okay, I'm good. Meredith asks her, are you sure you don't want someone to take over for you? And Bailey says, what I want is for you to find me a strawberry milkshake, extra thick. And Meredith is like, are you serious? And Bailey's like, yeah, the nausea is from hunger, Grey. Go. You know what? I don't blame her. A strawberry milkshake sounds fantastic. We're back with George and Alex, and George is pretending to be a teenager with a sore throat and all these sick breakouts, man. And Alex is like, dude, seriously. And George starts to leave, and Alex is like, all right, fine, sit down, open your mouth. I'd like to inspect your tonsils. He's looking so annoyed about this. Izzie comes in. Oh my God. What I love about our pattern here is that we're slowly fading into the people that are going to be the most upset by this situation. First, we had Cristina, who's just annoyed by the situation, thinks it's a little bit funny. George is upset on the behalf of the people that have been hurt in this situation, Izzie, and then Izzie, the actual person that has been hurt by Alex, has walked in and sees the person that she trusts the most, George, with her now enemy, Alex. Alex finally admits to Izzie that he failed his practical board exam, and Izzie is so upset that George is helping him study. And Alex says, Izzie, and Izzie says, you don't get to say my name, and you're unbelievable, she yells at George. And George runs after Izzie. And I love that we're seeing this really random concrete hallway up out of the basement. We don't usually see how they get in and out of the basement, or down to it, I should say. But I love that we get to see it in this tiny moment. And Izzie is so upset because, seriously, they're best friends, and she can't believe that he is helping. And then Meredith comes up with a strawberry milkshake, and Izzie finds out that they're all in on this, helping stinking Alex. And Izzie is like, he cheated on me. And Cristina is walking by with the Christmas tree and says, told you she'd find out. And Izzie is like, oh, of course, you're in on this too. And George yells out, she let him touch her boobs. And Cristina hits George with the Christmas tree, which I love. And then Izzie shouts out, he cheated on me with George's skanky SIF nurse. And George is like, now that's just rude. And then Meredith yells, we know he cheated on you. That's why we let you turn the living room into Santa's freaking village. And Izzie's like, what? And Meredith says, you know that we're trying to be supportive because you're having a hard time, but right now Alex is having a harder time. And Izzie says, why does everybody care what kind of time Alex is having? And then Meredith says, because he's dirty Uncle Sal. And they all turn to her and go, what? And she says, the one who embarrasses everyone at family reunions and who can't be left alone with the teenage girls, but you invite him to the picnic anyway because he's family. And Meredith says, I have a mother who doesn't recognize me. As far as family goes, this hospital, you guys are it. So I know you're pissed at Alex, but maybe you could try to help him anyway. Sort of like in the spirit of this holiday, you keep shoving down everybody's throats. Izzie shakes her head and walks off, and Meredith walks off in the opposite direction. Our scene cuts by George getting a page because poor Mrs. Shelton, our ulcer patient, is so not doing well. The husband is yelling for a doctor to get in here, and she is throwing up blood. Oh my God. Oh my God. Everybody in the room is panicking, as they should, but they're all over this poor woman. We then cut to a moving camera shot of Meredith walking through the hallways, going into the scrub-in room and telling Dr. Bailey that she got sidetracked. And Dr. Bailey just opens up the shake and starts pouring it into her mouth. And now I really want a strawberry shake. Oh man. George bursts in and says, Nadia Sheldon's ulcer perforated. She's vomiting blood by the pint. And then Bailey asks, is the chief back? And they both shake their heads. And she says, all right, both of you scrub in. I'm going to need all the help I can get. And she just keeps dumping the shake into her mouth as they start to scrub in. It's just genius. I love that these people just do not stop. We go to the CT room where we discover that the Christmas patient has a intracerebral bleed and that sometimes they can have a delayed presentation. And they have to now prep an OR and talk to his wife. Izzie walks out as Addison is coming up. And Addison's like, I don't think she's ever going to talk to me again. And Derek says nothing. And she goes, oh, I guess I'm invisible. He doesn't look at her and she goes, also inaudible. Ugh. Also, Addison is one of those people I did not warm up to for like 6 rewatches. Oh, you heard me. 6 rewatches. I can't stand Addison. I can't. It took me so long to like her. When I rewatch, I usually go from season 1 to about season 8, and then I just start over again. But every time I just couldn't like Addison. It took me so long, but now I'm on board with it and I can find humor in her voice and her little jokes and quips. Before, it used to be that I just wanted to just smack her across the face and just get rid of her altogether. But now, all right, fine. Derek lets her know that they're not going to be able to do anything tonight. And she's like, okay, well, I'm not upset, but I also can't figure out why you're not. And she says, are you mad? Are you depressed? And he says, no, Mr. Epstein is depressed. He's bleeding from his frontal lobe. Everything's fine. We're fine. And Addison looks very much like, why can you not talk to me about anything real? Derek begins to explain to our Chrismica patient that he needs a second surgery and that the frontal lobe is very difficult. We may be able to improve things, but you should be prepared for the possibility that things could get much worse. And Chrismica is like, oh, this is just great. I'm so glad I came to this hospital so I could be treated by a bunch of quacks. And the wife is trying not to cry because this is not her husband. This is not the man that she has spent her life with, built a home and a family with. And she's like, he doesn't speak to me this way. He doesn't speak to anyone this way. And Derek is like, I know this is difficult right now, but the important thing is we need to stop the bleeding. And she goes, look, he's the love of my life. And I know that you have a lot of other patients and you do a lot of other surgeries, but he's the love of my life. I need your word that you'll treat this change in my husband's personality as seriously as you would a fatal cancer, because that's the way this feels to me and my kids. And you know what? I agree with her. This man has drastically taken a 180 in personality change, and I do think that's as serious as cancer in a way. Now, I just want to say that my own father has had cancer and survived it. It was very serious. He nearly died. But if his personality suddenly went 180, I think that's as serious as cancer, because my dad is very much like this Chris McCa guy. And if he was suddenly angry and belligerent and grumpy, that's not my dad. So yeah, I do think I agree with her completely. We then go to Justin, our heart transplant boy, and he's telling his pastor that he doesn't deserve another heart. Oh my God. And the pastor is trying to explain to him that he doesn't have to feel guilty for having a new heart. God wants you to live. That's why he sent you the heart. And Justin says, I'm not stupid, okay? I know there's no such thing as God. And the mother is like, Justin. And the pastor says, it's all right. And Justin says, the heart I have now, my mom told me the heart came from Santa. I thought elves made it in their factory or whatever. But that's not true, is it? And the pastor says, no, it isn't. And he's like, yeah, I heard the nurses talking. Where it really came from is some other kid who had to die so I could live. And the mother is crying so hard. And then Justin says, and then I outgrew the heart. And now another kid has to die for me. And then he turns to his mother and says, that's what you would pray for all the time, isn't it, Mom? That some other kid would die so I could have a heart. And then he turns to the pastor and says, how does God feel about that? His eyes are drooping and he's slurring his words. And the monitor starts to beep. And oh my God, oh my goodness, his heart is being rejected by his body and really by the spirit, if you ask me. Cristina steps in and starts working on the boy, flattening out the gurney and everything. And she's like, get her out of here. He's in VPIB. And they're charging the paddles and it's all happening at once. And the mother is crying and yelling and they finally remove her from the room. And finally, Justin wakes back up and the monitor goes steady again. Justin coughs and opens his eyes and he just looks miserable. We fade to black for what I'm sure is another commercial break if we were watching this on TV. And Cristina is asking Burke if they can get him another heart and if they can get him back on the list. And Burke says he waited 2 years for this heart. He has to fight for the one he has. He has to decide that he wants to live. And Cristina says, okay, medically speaking, is there anything else we haven't talked about? And Burke says, the way you're feeling right now, it's why I have to believe in something bigger than me. Because if I didn't, that powerlessness would eat me alive. And Cristina looks a little bit defeated because she doesn't believe in a higher power. And Burke most definitely does. And as someone who does believe in God, I don't think I could be with, no, I know I could not be with a partner who does not believe in God as well. That to me is one of the tip top priorities. Because if you don't believe in the same higher power, the same religion, the same spiritual walk, you're not going to be able to agree or even make decisions together in so many other areas in life. We get the sound of a drill as Derek is now working on Mr. Epstein, Chrismica again, and he requests some music, something with Christmas carols. And then he asks if there is such a thing as Hanukkah carols, and then turns to Izzie and says, you may never know what may penetrate the psyche. And then we go to the ulcer patient's OR. She's finally in the operating room, and she's got 2 ulcers kissing up against each other. One's perfed, and the other one is bleeding. And George says, 2 ulcers. I'm not surprised with that family. I should have thrown them out. Why didn't I throw them out? That's what I should have done. And Bailey is getting her forehead patted down. And she says, stop whining, O'Malley. You had your chance. You didn't take it. Move on. And he's like, right, sorry. And then she says, do not kick me. And George is like, what? She says, are you kicking me under the table, O'Malley? And he says, no. Then clearly I wasn't talking to you. And then she starts groaning and steps back from the table, and we get a shot of her feet stepping back, which I really love. And then she says, you cannot kick me while I'm doing my job. And then we slowly pan the camera down to her belly as she presses against it with her gloves and then says, thank you. I love that she was talking to the unborn. Oh my God. Like, only Bailey would boss around her children before they're even born. Oh my goodness. We get a beautiful wide shot of Seattle at night, and Izzie is walking into the basement where Alex is completely asleep. She slaps him and says, wake up. God, no wonder you failed your boards. What do you expect to learn this stuff by osmosis? And he says, why are you here? And she says, I'm a farmer, okay? I've been drooling and puking and crapping my pants. And he says, you really came here to help me study? She says, well, I'm not actually crapping my pants right now, am I? And he says, why would you want to help me after what I did? And she looks like she's about to cry. And then she says, because it's what Jesus would freaking do, which was my opening quote. And I'm absolutely obsessed with it. We then go to Justin's room where he is asleep, and Cristina is standing beside his bed. She's actually wearing a brown sweater, and it looks super cozy and soft. She sits down next to Justin and says, you know, I don't believe in Santa either, or God. And Justin turns to her and she says, I believe in medicine, and it's a medical miracle that you're alive. With the heart that you had, you should have died 2 weeks after you were born, except some surgeon was able to give you someone else's heart, which is so much cooler than Santa. So I'm just saying, I think you should decide to live. Live so you can become a doctor and you can find a way to do heart transplants without someone having to die. Or, you know, live so you can grow up and have kids, and you know what? Raise them not to believe in Santa. Now that would really piss off your mom. And Justin kind of smiles a little bit at this. And we slowly are getting closer and closer to Cristina as we pan in a small curve around Justin. And she says, because in your case, dying really isn't the best revenge. Dr. Bailey, followed by George, is finally going into the waiting room to update Mrs. Sheldon's family, and says that she lost a lot of blood, but we're able to replace it, and she's going to require several days of observation, but she should have a full recovery. And Dr. Bailey says, thank God. And she goes, oh, we do thank God, because we're certainly not going to thank you. We should sue you for all you're worth. We sat here and sat here and sat here. And Bailey just quietly says to George, you want to help me out? And George says, really? As the woman continues to yell. And Bailey says, you wanted your second chance. Now you got it. The woman is saying, I should sue you in this entire hospital. And George says, yeah, you could sue us, or you could just consider the possibility of just shutting the heck up. And the grandma says, what did you say to me? She turns to Grandpa and says, did you hear what he says to me? And the grandpa finally hears something and says, oh, I heard him. And he has a toothpick hanging out of his mouth. Like, are you kidding me right now? The grandson says, you can't talk to an old lady like that. And the grandmother says, where's my daughter? I'd like to see her. And George says, well, you can't. I'm her doctor. She is my patient, and this is a hospital, which is the kind of place where people can generally use a little peace and quiet. So no, right now you can't see her. And I'm not saying this because you just threatened to sue Dr. Bailey, who spent the last several hours saving your daughter's life, your wife's life. I'm saying this because she is my patient, and she is in the recovery ring of this hospital trying to recover, and visiting hours are over. Good night. And Merry Christmas. He walks away, and we get this beautiful side shot of Dr. Bailey with her arms folded over her large pregnant belly in this angry family. And Bailey just shakes her head and goes, interns. Too emotional. My apologies. And then she walks off, and oh my God. We're back in the basement with Alex and Izzie, and he's asking her if the nausea is constant, and she won't look at him. And she's trying not to cry. And he asks her when it first started. And she says, after I worked in the fields all day. And he asks her if she has any allergies. And she's sniffing and crying as she says, no. She still won't look at him. And Alex is clearly upset by all of this too. He sits down next to her as she continues to cry. And he says that he never wanted to hurt her. And she shakes her head and says, you didn't hurt me. I don't even know you. I'm a farmer. And he says, you're still the patient. And she said, well, what does it look like? He's sitting beside her, trying to look into her eyes, but she won't look at him. And he says, it's pesticide poisoning. Crying's a symptom. That's it, right? And she's crying so hard that she can barely breathe. She's wheezing a little bit and she says, right, and then sobs even harder. And we get this really amazing faraway shot of down the hallway looking at them as he's sitting beside her, clearly not knowing how to fix this. And she's just so hurt by the fact that they finally got together and he cheats on her. It's just, ugh. Meredith walks down the hall and we see Bailey has collapsed on one of the gurneys, completely asleep in her normal day clothes, but she was too tired to get herself home. And Meredith is no longer in scrubs, but a beige coat with a long tan and brown scarf. And Derek meets her in the hallway. He's just gotten off the elevator. Elevators, another very important character in this show. She stops when she hears his voice and they begin to walk together out of the hospital. And she's like, oh, holidays. It's an interesting day. And he's like, yeah, I do know. And they just keep looking at each other into each other's eyes. And we get a faraway shot of them walking out of the hospital and apart from one another. And our shot opens up even wider to show the front of the hospital, the bigness of the building as they separate, saying Merry Christmas to one another. Then Derek goes into Joe's bar. There's a wreath on the inside of the door, which I really like because, of course, normally there would be a wreath on the outside of the door. But as viewers, that doesn't give us anything. So putting the wreath on the inside of the building, on the inside of the bar, gives us a better feeling of Christmas and allows us to actually see the decoration, even if it would not normally be inside. I mean, come on. Joe gives Derek a double scotch single malt for Christmas and says, and Derek calls him a good man. Addison calls him over. She's got all these magazines that she wants to look through for Christmas gifts. And she asks about his patient's frontal lobe. And Derek says that he woke up smiling, which I love because that means we got a tiny little wrap bow that our Chrismukkah guy is celebrating Chrismukkah yet again. Addison reveals that she's drinking a hot butter rum and that it's very delicious. And she says, Christmas, Derek, we love Christmas. At least we used to. And he says, yeah, Christmas makes you want to be with the people that you love. And she looks up at him and he says, I'm not saying this to hurt you or because I want to leave you, because I don't. Meredith wasn't a fling. She wasn't revenge. I fell in love with her. That doesn't go away because I decided to stay with you. He sits down at the table with her finally, takes a sip of his drink, and we get our final shot of the two of them through the bar glass door as they're both looking down at their drinks, not sure how to proceed. Cristina arrives home to Burke's apartment and sees the mini Christmas tree all decorated and a menorah in the window with the blinds lifted so that it can fully be seen from the outside. And it's just really sweet because we're seeing how Burke is trying to join their lives together. Even if Cristina is resistant, he is still trying. And I love the shot that we get of her climbing into bed with him, bare feet, crawling over him to get underneath the covers where it's nice and warm. And he's just reading a book, looking so suave. I mean, like, honestly, this man, I can't. Like, he's everything. Cristina cuddles up with him. She says that Justin made it through the night. And Burke says, I wonder what made it through to him. And Christina's like, I don't know. We fade to Christmas lights in the Christmas tree, and all of them are twinkling. And we find that Izzie is underneath the Christmas tree looking up into the lights. And Meredith is like, what are you doing? She goes, oh, just looking. And so Meredith joins her underneath the Christmas tree. And George walks in and goes, what are we doing? And Izzie just says, lights. George joins them on the other side of Meredith. So we've got Meredith sandwiched in between George and Izzie. And we get this beautiful pan across their faces as the lights change and twinkle and colors and glowing. And I have to say that this is actually one of my favorite shots of this episode. And I think it's why I love it so much. We slowly pan up the Christmas tree to the top of the star, looking down at our three. And we can't see their faces, just their bodies, and how they all have the same stance of their feet on the floor, knees bent, hands folded on their midsection. And they're just a family underneath the Christmas tree. And I really love it because, of course, they can't be a family around the Christmas tree. That's too normal. Our last words of the episodes are Meredith saying that you find your tribe. And I love that. This episode truly is about Meredith finding her family and the people around her. And I love this episode so much. The Christmas lights, the joy of Christmas, and the joy of family, whether or not you were born into it or you chose them the way that R5 did. And yes, Izzie and Alex are not fully mended, but I have a feeling that they're on their way to getting there. And I'm not just saying that because I've seen this show a billion times, or at least it feels that way. All right, that is our Christmas episode of Grey's Anatomy. There is so much to talk about with this show because so much happens. It's very similar to when I talked about Parenthood, another TV show. Lots of characters, lots of dialogue, lots of people talking over each other, and everybody is intertwined. Absolutely love it. I love an ensemble cast, and this is definitely one of my top TV shows. Even if I don't love all of the seasons, I do love Grey's Anatomy. I still come back to it again and again. I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this episode of Let's Rewatch It Again. If you have any comments, questions, or any requests on TV shows or movies that you would like me to rewatch yet again, you can email me at letsrewatchitagain@gmail.com. You can also find me at Instagram at Let's Rewatch It Again. We also have a YouTube channel, Let's Rewatch It Again podcast. And if you are listening to this, please subscribe, follow, rate, review, all the things. It helps this to grow bigger. I don't know, just to make me feel good in life. Or yourself. It's nice to do things nice. What can I say? It's what Jesus would freaking do. Actually, I don't know if he would do that, but it does sound like a nice thing that he might do. All right, until next time, I'll catch you on the flippity flip.